Welcome to the Holy Post. Protests have continued after last month's school shooting in Nashville, including in the Tennessee state legislature, where the majority Republicans expelled 2 Democrats after their protests broke the rules of decorum. What was really accomplished by this extreme response, and what's really behind the rise of retaliation politics? Then I talk with Alan Noble about his new book on getting out of bed, The Burden and Gift of Living. Noble says we've believed the lies that life is supposed to be pleasurable, that suffering is abnormal, and that our feelings reflect reality. Instead, at a time when depression, anxiety, and loneliness are skyrocketing, he shows how our faith equips us to suffer well. All of that, plus scientists have grown mammoth meatballs in a lab. Sounds delicious. This week, we also have a new bonus episode of Getting Schooled with Caitlin Chess, exclusively for our Holy Post supporters. In it, she explains the history and theology of kids in the church. And I've got some exciting news for everybody. We're launching a brand new Holy Post newsletter, and it's free. You can sign up by going to holypost.com, and while you're there, you can click the Support Us button to find out more about how to become a Holy Post supporter, where you'll get access to all of that great bonus material that we talk about every week on the show. Okay, here is episode 560.
Hey there, welcome back to the podcast. This is Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. We are here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hello, Phil.
Hi, and Caitlin Chess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
Hi. Do you have more books behind you than usual? Maybe your camera's just a little wider angle.
Well, no, I just have I've run out of space. So now books are just accumulating on top of other books. It's bad.
Right. When are you going to organize them by color so it looks like a rainbow behind you? That's what the cool kids do.
Never happen.
Never?
No, they need to be accessible like a library. There needs to be topics and subtopics, and they need to be organized that way.
I agree, Caitlin.
Thank you, Skye.
Are they? Are they organized?
They
by
are,
topics?
except for the part where all of the new ones I've gotten over the last year are just in random places, and that needs to.
Yes.
We need to fix that.
Yes. That's like when we were collecting lots of DVDs for my kids and then Blu-rays, and I had to figure out, how do I organize these? Are they alphabetical? Are they topical? Are kids movies and adult movies, grown-up movies separate? Or are they all intermingled? How do I know, it's like how many problems can I solve with one organizational system? And then Netflix came along and it all just became irrelevant.
See, there's nothing
overnight.
that could come along and get rid of the books.
You say that now.
I refuse.
Oh.
There's nothing that could change my desire to have physical books.
Okay, all right. My books are Kindle books, and I can search them all. I have them. I have my whole library. Well, not my whole library. Much of my library with me wherever I go. I can search. I can remember what I highlighted in that one book that one time 10 years ago.
But what about the joy of an actual book? The smell of an old book, your ability to use a pen or a highlighter.
Caitlin, you're sounding so elite and educated. What about the joy?
He owns an electronic thing, and I'm the elitist one.
Yeah. You're the elitist.
If you
Technology
really
has become populist.
Oh,
yeah, if you really understood where the populist Christian movement was, you'd appreciate the warm glow of a book fire.
Yeah.
And the delight of a book ban and all those wonderful things.
Skye, you've grown too far.
Whoa, yeah,
what I do when I travel, I bring my Kindle and then I bring one page I rip out of a very old book and I just rub that page on my nose to get the smell, and then I read my Kindle.
Phil!
It's just the same.
And you just throw out the page?
Well, after the smell goes away. Yeah, it's that old book smell. You got to get that old.
You really, truly just said the most horrific thing I can imagine you saying.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post.
And sometimes Caitlin.
Okay, we're going to jump right in. Oh, Caitlin, you're almost at the end of your semester. You're writing some papers. You said one of them was kind of interesting before we started recording. Tell us about this.
No.
Oh, no, they're all interesting.
Well, yeah, that's true. They're all interesting. We'll get to it.
Okay.
It's gonna be seamless. You're not even gonna know I'm talking about my paper.
Oh, okay. So I should just go about my day.
Yeah, and then if you want to guess later where the paper was, you can do that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is your paper about how to organize personal libraries?
No, but that would be a good one.
Yeah, that'd be a good one too. Okay, we got animal news to kick it off because there's always interesting things happening in the world of animals. A giant meatball was produced from an extinct mammoth's DNA. Mammoth Meatball, a Australian cultured meat company called Vow, which just seems like a bad name for something that's messing with nature, wanted to get people talking about cultured meat, so it used DNA from an extinct woolly mammoth, and it made a meatball. And
How is that possible?
meatball made of sheep cells inserted with mammoth DNA. So they're somewhere between, and there were some gaps in the mammoth DNA, so they inserted African elephant DNA to fill the gaps in the mammoth DNA. So it's a bit of a mess, to be honest.
Jurassic Park taught us anything?
Yes, exactly.
But think how much safer Jurassic Park would have been if it had been a buffet, not a zoo.
Yeah, where you could eat dinosaur meat.
Yeah,
Right.
just
Fair
have
enough.
a little T-Rex. Would you like a little T-Rex? Like one of those Brazilian barbecues, those Brazilian steakhouses where they come around with big pieces of meat, although they'd be pieces of meat like the one they hang off the side of Fred Flintstone's car in the opening to the Flintstones, because it's brontosaurus steak, and it flips his car upside down because it's so big. So they
Caitlin
come
has no
by.
idea what you're talking about.
Okay,
Stay
but
with me, Caitlin.
I
Stay with
knew
me.
the Jurassic Park part.
Yes, that's good.
I've seen those movies.
That's good.
Okay.
Thank
That's
you.
good. That is so good. We're so impressed.
Thanks.
We're so happy for you. Flintstones. Have you ever seen an episode of the Flintstones?
I don't think so.
I doubt it.
Can you, if I say hum the Flintstones theme song, you
Zero
got
chance.
anything?
Nothing.
Zero.
Nothing.
Meet the Flintstones. They're a modest historic family from the town of Bedrock. It's a place right out of history. It was from the period of classic theme song, Brady Bunch, the Gilligan's Island theme, I Dream of Jeannie. These are, oh man.
Nothing.
And
I
it's a
got
classic
nothing.
Hanna-Barbera cartoon, isn't
Classic
it?
Hanna-Barbera.
Yeah.
I have no idea what that means.
It's fun.
Your childhood was so bankrupt.
I had books, Skye.
Did you spend your whole
We
childhood?
had books. We had more books than we knew what to do with, which is why we watched the Flintstones.
Did you spend your whole childhood just sniffing old books, saying, that's
You know what? I watched
kind of earthy.
I watched a lot of VeggieTales.
Oh, okay.
Touche,
So-
Phil.
Good.
There you go.
Okay. Theme song?
No, I am not doing that. That is not happening. Oh my gosh.
Okay, fine. A giant meatball made from flesh cultivated using the DNA of an extinct woolly mammoth has been unveiled at Nemo, a science museum in the Netherlands. Made in Australia, now on exhibit in the Netherlands.
There's some way this goes badly.
Wait, and this is called cultured meat?
Yeah, culture
Yeah, what
means
does
they
that
grow it.
mean?
Means they grow
That's
it.
when a jock goes to an honors class.
They grow.
Wait, that's their whole company? Is growing meat?
Yeah, because it's going to replace having to,
Oh,
raise
yeah, okay.
cows and kill them. We can just grow meat in a lab. What could possibly go wrong? Oh no, the short ribs have become sentient. Now what do we do? Get out of the lab. We'll say it came
Wait.
from the wet market next door, but it really came from the meat lab.
I have a question.
Yes, that was very timely and topical.
Has someone eaten it?
No. They're not
Oh,
going
good,
to eat it.
good,
They don't. They honestly do not know if it's safe. They
No,
said this protein is literally 4,000 years old. We haven't seen it in a very long time. That means we would want to put it through some rigorous tests.
I have found some protein in my son's car under the seat that's probably about that old, and I wouldn't eat it.
And the most disturbing part is they don't refer to it as meat. They refer to it as flesh.
Oh,
A giant meatball made from flesh, cultivated using the DNA of a mammoth.
no.
Go back to your Brazilian steakhouse. Which flesh would you like next? Oh, pass. Salad bar. You lost me at flesh.
Do you remember the old Matthew Broderick movie with I think it's called The Freshman.
You don't even have to ask that. Finish your question,
true.
and Caitlin is already shaking her head no. The Freshman?
Yeah, it was with Marlon Brando.
No, I don't.
So
I don't
it's
think
a
I remember
great
that.
movie, actually. It's a lot of fun, but it's about the super ultra rich elite mobile restaurant that
Okay.
only serves
Wait.
the meat of endangered species.
Okay. Does the movie end with Matthew Broderick eating Marlon Brando, or the other way around?
No, it's more complicated than that. It's kind of a spoof off The Godfather, and it was I remember it being a fun movie, but it's that whole idea of like eating exotic flesh, exotic meats, and they got like a Komodo dragon or something that they were going to cook.
I really don't. I don't know where to go with the story from here.
No.
You've driven us into a strange socioeconomic cul-de-sac out of which there is no escape, other than to just jump in the sewer drain and then come up in another story.
Okay.
Let's do it. Let's do
Covered
the
in
Mario
some
thing.
kind of flesh that I picked up in the sewer drain, probably mutant turtles between the age of 13 and 19. Okay, next story. We got to talk about, are you okay, Caitlin? You look really confused.
Yep.
She doesn't know what mutant turtles are either.
Even if they're between the age of 13 and 19?
What does that tell me?
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Caitlin. It tells you Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I have heard of that.
Okay, thank you. Can you hum the theme song?
Absolutely not.
Either can I. I don't even know if there is an official one or just different versions of one. Okay. We need to talk about Tennessee. I'm sorry. We did Christian Nashvilleism a few weeks ago, and Tennessee kind of, heard that story and then said, hold my beer, watch what I'm going to do next. And so 2 Democratic state legislators, that always confuses me. Legislature or legislature?
Tor.
That's
I
not
know,
it.
I
in
know, but
any
why?
way.
Legislator is a person.
I know.
Legislature is a
But why is
body
one
of
thing.
law.
Why is
Yeah.
one cha and the other one's ta?
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know.
English is hard.
You just assume that I'm just dumb, and it's no. I'm asking good questions.
You are.
I'm not afraid to ask the questions that people want answered.
Clearly.
Okay.
Like, why does a Tor work in a chur?
Thought-provoking, Phil.
Okay, so there were, if you don't know what happened, there were protests at the State House in Nashville, Tennessee, the Tennessee State House, for gun control measures after the shooting in Nashville. The protests were getting bigger and bigger. 3 Democratic legislators joined into the protests and actually brought them to the floor of the assembly, stopped the proceedings of the assembly, yelled through bullhorns, and encouraging the protesters in their protests, and subsequently were kicked out, expelled, thrown out of the legislature, which does not mean that you just have to go home today and come back tomorrow. It actually means you're no longer a member of the legislature. So this has created quite a hubbub. It's interestingly, 3 were brought up to be expelled. 2 of them were young black men. They were both expelled. The other was a 60-year-old white woman. She was not expelled. She stayed.
But I believe it was by a single vote.
It was.
By a
she
single
survived.
vote. Yeah, but no one's reading anything into that. No one.
No.
No one at all. Okay, Skye, did you follow that? Did you think it's worth following? Do you think it's worth discussing?
Yes, to all the above. What I found interesting is I read a piece where, there's 2 ways you can look at this. One is,
At least, yeah.
at least. But one is, very technically speaking, these 3 legislators did violate the rules of the legislature by disrupting normal business, by protesting, with the bullhorn. So they did violate a rule.
They did.
And for violation of that rule, it makes sense that they would experience some consequence. But there were numerous options available to express and reprimand these legislators for what they did, and to make sure that ongoing business of the legislature was not going to be continually disrupted by more and more protesters. The fact that they chose the most extreme possible response by kicking them out is what's kind of crazy here. And it sets a really bad precedent. And then on top of that, what you already mentioned, that they voted to kick out the 2 young black men, but not the older white woman, makes it look that much worse. And I worry that this is going to be picked up by state houses around the country from either party when the minority party does something they don't like, or a minority legislator, meaning a Republican or Democrat minority, does it. This is now going to be the way they respond. And the other thing that makes no sense to me is, apparently based on the rules in Tennessee, the 2 that were kicked out can be put right back in by their districts if they choose to make them the interim legislators.
And they probably will.
And they probably will. So it's not going to accomplish anything other than send a signal that the dominant majority party is going to severely punish the minority party for things that they don't. You're just pulling out a hammer to deal with something that did not require it. And that's ridiculous. And then, last thing before I shut up, this all was in response
Skye.
to the school shooting.
Skye, don't shut up. This is a podcast. We're supposed to talk.
That's true. So one of them, I forget who it was, one of the 2 that was kicked out after being expelled was embraced by a mother from the school where the shooting happened. When you are being embraced by mothers of murdered children after being kicked out from the other party, that's not a good look for the party in power. Like, this is the moment, and this was the reason you chose to use this extreme measure. It's just sick. And it's really troubling to me on multiple fronts.
Yeah. Caitlin, help us out.
I think part of what's going on here, I was listening this morning to the New York Times daily podcast on this, and they had some audio of what was happening. And it was so interesting to me. One, I think there's just different styles of communication and expectations for what happens in these contexts. Like, they had clips from some of the Republican politicians that were just like decorum, and we need to keep things clean and good, and we need to and there's a very different style, especially by the 2 black legislators, that is partially a style born out of the Black church. One of those 2 legislators has a background in theology, and I don't know if he's ordained, but just this Sunday he preached in a church. There's a very different style of communication, and that's not just, isolated to the Black church, but it is historically what has happened to get things changed politically, to speak in a prophetic style. And that's something that's really interesting to me, and I think this example highlights it well, which is that many of us think we know we're being prophetic when we throw a fuss, when we're involved in a protest, when we want to flip some tables over, when it's the thing that we think is the right thing to do. And when we think it's not right, either we really care more about the Second Amendment than about children's lives, or whether we're just making a different judgment on a particular policy, that's when we tend to say, this isn't the moment to be prophetic. This is the moment to reason with each other, to have a, serious argument where we sit down and follow the rules. And I do think, especially for Christians who are engaging in public life, that question of discerning when is the moment to be, quote unquote, prophetic, to say, I'm going to say the hard thing, even if it breaks rules, and I'll face the consequences for it. Even before this kind of extreme consequence, there were other consequences like being censored or being booted out of their committees that people could have said, I'll take that. This is the moment to take the consequence for breaking the rules and saying the hard thing. I'm not willing to compromise and have a little, dispute in the legislature about this other thing. I think right now there are people protesting outside our walls because children have been murdered, and we need to have a conversation about gun rights and gun legislation. Then there's other moments when you have to discern is not the moment to be prophetic. This is the moment to follow the rules for the sake of getting something pragmatically done. And figuring out when that is really difficult. It's hard to make that decision in a way that isn't motivated by just our identification with a political party, which I think, as Skye was saying, was very clearly in display here, that there weren't decisions being made on either side, truly, that were just about pragmatic policy. It was both about kind of, this is the moment to do what is the right thing, and discerning what is actually needed in this moment, what God demands of us, is really important. I think, as Skye described, it's pretty clear in this moment that what we need to have nationally is a conversation about legislation to restrict access to guns. But other people will make other judgments about that. And I think we're not being, honest all of the time about the fact that part of the difference that occurs in a lot of our conversations is different judgments about when is the moment to be prophetic and when is the moment to kind of follow the rules.
And I could see that in this case going either way, but these are elected legislators. Like, they have a seat at the table. They have elected power to inform policy. So it's not like they're a completely disenfranchised minority that doesn't have any voice in government, and therefore their only option is to protest. They had the option to protest or not protest. They chose to protest. They broke the agreed upon rules of the legislature. I think it makes sense that there's some kind of punishment for that, some kind of way of communicating to everyone there that we're not going to do this because it would disrupt the normal flow of business. But to pull this extreme by kicking them out entirely, that's not a coincidence. It's never been done this way before. And the fact that they chose to do it with these three or these two on this topic is very, very telling. And the amount of baggage that this action carries for no political payoff. Like, there's no reward for the Republicans for doing this in Tennessee. It's so short-sighted and incredibly stupid. I don't get it.
I think it's interesting to bring in, how are Christian organizations reacting to this, or quasi-Christian organizations. So writers for the Falkirk Center, which is now the Defend Freedom from Everyone Center, whatever the name is now, just said, we applaud whenever Marxists get kicked out of the legislature. More. We want to kick out more Marxists from the legislature.
So they want to kick out duly elected representatives of the people.
Yes, if their beliefs are not correct.
Then what's the point of a democracy?
The point, and this, Skye, you are asking the big questions.
That's what I do.
You are totally, Caitlin's going to turn around in her chair and look for the right book to answer your question from the ones that aren't color-coded behind her, and we'll give her just 30 seconds to do that. While I say something else. Okay, start looking, Caitlin. It's not working. You're not.
No.
You're not. No, okay. Here's what I think is interesting. Okay, so you've got like the Daily Wire, which is, where is it based? Oh, guess where it's based? Nashville. It's in Nashville. It's right-wing politics, kind of populist right-wing politics, now getting spread more and more heavily with a layer of Christianity. So if you go to the Daily Wire website right now, you can learn about libertarianism, and you can also learn about the book of Exodus. That's weird. That seems odd, doesn't it? And they're showcasing Jordan Peterson, the provocative whatever he is from Canada, who is now talking more and more about Christianity and Western civilization, and who recently tweeted that the Pope is wrong when he calls for social justice because there is nothing Christian about social justice. So this is a secular...
Coming from the guy who's been a Christian for about 30 seconds for market purposes.
Yeah. But he's smart. Unlike the Pope and everyone else who's come before him in that tradition, he's smart, and he's using really good thinking. And it's just amazing that now that we have people like Jordan Peterson to really examine the Bible, they're discovering that the Bible lines up with right-wing populist rhetoric. Wow! How did that happen? So one of the things the Daily Wire did in response to this was, and this is where it gets kind of odd, they did a story about the sermon preached by one of these expelled legislators and critiqued his theology. So try to imagine like NBC News covering a story about a legislator and then critiquing the theology that legislator preached in a sermon.
I think that sounds kind of fun. It could be like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing where we could just sit there and watch the sermons and then be talking during it and like critiquing it.
Okay.
It'd be a blast.
Skye, you're not taking this seriously. So
no, because I don't think they're serious.
I am censuring you. I'm censuring you because you're not taking it seriously. Phil, I will not expel you.
You could mute my mic right now.
Yeah,
I could.
Yeah,
I could do that.
Okay,
that would be fun. I'm not done talking yet.
Oh, all right,
I haven't fully made my point. My point is, okay, if Jordan Peterson, a public intellectual, is now teaching theology to the Pope, and the Daily Wire, just a right-wing news service, is now critiquing the theology of a liberal pastor. If he is a pastor, I don't know what he is, but he preached and it was very liberal. And so they're critiquing it. It seems like there is a movement to more and more cross Christianity with populist right-wing politics and kind of merge them into the same thing so that we're not simply, for example, the Daily Wire isn't just like, we're here to defend, I don't know, Milton Friedman economics or, this libertarian point of view, or we're here to oppose classic Marxism, where we see classic Marxism popping up in American thought. No, we are here to promote right-wing populism and to talk about Christianity in such a way that assumes the two, shut that door in Skye Jitani's Death Star. You cannot come in the middle of I hope you were dressed. I don't know who that was. And so we confuse the two so that we can't tell where our Jesus ends and our Milton Friedman begins. We're so freaking messed up.
Do you think, though, Phil, was that an intentional strategy on the part of the Daily Wire, or have they just, through market research, figured out that when we combine ultra-conservative right-wing politics with enough Bible and Christian language, it works better in selling our product?
I think you are often assuming people are more solely money motivated than they actually are, both inside and outside the church.
I may be guilty of that, but I have another theory as to what happened in Nashville that's not driven by money.
Okay. Oh, driven by hot chicken?
No, although closer. I think there's a strong in-group cultural dynamic that was happening here. And I don't want to be accused of both sidism here, but let me just explain.
Okay.
First of all, Tennessee is a wildly red state. It's overwhelmingly Republican. It's gerrymandered out the wazoo. So those Democratic pockets that have some population like Nashville get diluted and they don't get their say. There was really no conceivable political road through which greater gun control regulation was going to happen in Tennessee. It just wasn't going to happen. These three legislators knew that. And they knew that their protesting on the floor of the legislature wasn't going to actually result in any policy changes to the gun laws in Tennessee, but they did it anyway. So you might argue that the reason they did it wasn't because it was actually going to change the law. They did it because it was, in a sense, virtue signaling to their community and their constituency that we're with you and we are willing to disrupt the business of the legislature to make a stink about gun rights and gun laws and violence and all that. On the flip side, the Republicans who kicked them out of the legislature, they knew they would be back in a couple of days. They knew the regulations wouldn't keep them out. They knew this wasn't going to have any substantive change to anything, but they did it to virtue signal to their constituents that we care about guns so much and we're so against anybody who's progressive or liberal that we will do the most extreme action possible to these legislatures and punish them. But it's all virtue signaling on both sides to the communities and constituencies that they care about. And nothing ends up happening on either side. We don't have any new gun regulations, and we haven't diminished any of those progressive voices in any way in Tennessee. So what was the point of it all? Just to score points with your own side.
Caitlin.
I mean,
tell him he's wrong.
I do think he's wrong. I mean, I think he's right that there is a similar dynamic that happens on both sides that is entirely about solidifying in-group membership. I think the difference in this case is partially that I think it's easier to see, and I can't know the motives or the intentions of any of these people. I don't know them. It's easier to see a reason, though, why you would be motivated to do what those three Democratic lawmakers did for reasons of actual belief than it is to see reasons why you would do that. It's harder to justify the Republican lawmakers in that legislature really truly believing they were ousting people for good reasons. Like they're dangerous and bad. But it's a lot easier to see why those three Democratic lawmakers were saying, I want to honor the protests that are happening. And I know that it might not change our laws. It did change some things for them. Like they very likely got a pretty big bump in their fundraising. They got some national attention. It was successful in some ways. I just do think it's harder. I think you're right about the general dynamics. I think it's harder to do that in this case, in part because I'm not in Nashville right now, but I know people who are. And the feeling on the ground from a lot of people that I know is this is like, I am demanded by the context that I am in and the real horror that I have seen to do something, even if I don't think under human perspectives this will do anything. Again, I don't know their motives. I can't assign them entirely. But I think in this case, it's a lot easier for me to understand why you might say, I'm doing whatever I can to get grieving mothers' voices heard, even if it doesn't cause like a pragmatic good effect in actual legislation.
Right.
But I do think it's important to say, as Skye just said, it's important for all of us to get a good check on what kinds of markers of things let us know what category to put people in, and how we are in ourselves trying to kind of use certain signals to put ourselves in the right group. It's a really powerful thing. And part of what's happened in American politics over the last even just 10 or 20 years is that it's happened more and more often that a variety of our identities all fit into a single category that we identify with other people, versus it used to be more likely that, hey, I might identify with this politician because he's a Republican and I generally vote Republican, but he's not my gender or my race. He doesn't have my religious background. So I might identify with someone else if it's a debate about religion or a debate about sexual violence, but it's becoming increasingly true, as you were just describing, Phil, with the religious language, that it all comes in one pot. If I'm a Christian, that also means a slew of other things about me. It's high predictor that I will, identify with all those other things. And I really think, as much as this won't change things nationally, I think there's a really significant onus on us, especially as Christians, to resist that categorization of ourselves, to not kind of let national media put all of our identities into a bucket that kind of say, these are the things that you should care about, that should scare you, that should motivate you, that should cause you to vote the way that you do, especially as Christians who don't fit neatly in a political party. Like, we should be resisting that categorization of Republican politics as uniquely Christian. And there are ways that we can do that in our relationships, in our churches, in the way that we interact in our local politics that we don't often choose to do because we're not being conscious of enough of the fact that we're being categorized in those kind of ways and shaped and formed in those kinds of ways.
Yeah. Okay. Skye, you pointed out this piece written for the Dispatch by Nick Catoggio. I don't know how to say his name. Nick Legislature wrote this piece about all of this, and he quotes some other GOP thinkers who say this was just a stupid thing to do because you just raised these, three Democrats' national profile, made it easier for them to fundraise. Now they're celebrities. They're on CNN. They're all over the news. So you strengthen their platform, and they'll be right back in the legislature, by Tuesday or Wednesday.
Exactly.
So what was the point? Well, the point, and so they're kind of speculating. And then he compares this to what is happening currently in Wisconsin, where basically the same thing had happened, where the GOP had taken over so thoroughly that they were able to rewrite, gerrymander and rewrite rules to try to create more or less one-party rule long-term in a state. And because of the loss of one seat in the Supreme Court last week, all of that could now be undone for the Republicans. There's now a liberal control of the Supreme Court in Wisconsin that will probably unwrite all of that gerrymandering that was done to try to preserve one-party rule in Wisconsin. And so now you've got Republicans in Wisconsin trying to impeach, calling for the impeachment of someone who hasn't even taken their place yet. They haven't even been seated in the Supreme Court yet, and they already want to impeach them for who knows why, which won't, and the conclusion of all of this is not going to do any good, so why are you doing it? Why are we doing things that don't do any good? And Catoggio tries to summarize a couple of reasons that one reason retaliation has become more important, a bigger part of the Republican Party in the Trump era. So if you want to prove that you're a Republican of the Trumpy variety, you have to show how hard you retaliate, even if it's counterproductive, even if it doesn't actually win anything, like, nominating Trump again would be counterproductive and probably wouldn't win anything, but it shows that you're a fighter and you retaliate. The other thing, he says, there's another way to view what happened on Thursday in Nashville, not as a statement of tribal identity. We did this so that everyone knows that we're Trumpy Republicans, but as an assertion of dominance. The more insecure Republicans feel about their hold on power, the more harshly they try to reassert it. In Wisconsin, they used extreme gerrymandering to build a huge legislative majority. The election of this new Supreme Court justice has put that at risk. So here they are already weighing an extreme measure like impeachment. In Tennessee, the three rebels rebelled at a moment when anti-gun sentiment was likely higher than usual because of the school shooting. Republican legislators might have felt obliged in the moment to send a message that the pro-gun majority will not yield to public pressure. Results, another extreme measure, expulsion instead of censure. And then he quotes Greg Sargent, who says, the irony is that this series of red state power plays has a national audience. And the more alienated that audience becomes, the more insecure Republicans will feel about their hold on power. We've ended up in a sort of vicious circle in which, rather than moderate in ways that would grow the coalition, the GOP continues to crack down even harder on liberals to protect its cultural turf in ways that are ultimately self-destructive. Okay, agree. Kaylin, agree, disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I think even people who are not paying so much attention to national politics probably feel in their own lives the reality of how easy it is to get sucked into both believing that you're on a team that needs to win and also feeling a desire to retaliate against a team that needs to lose, whether that's in terms of political identity or like if you take a little, trip down Christian Twitter lane, you will see all of the ways in which people do that with all kinds of identities, theological tribes, denominations. And I do think it's important to say, like, it's easy from the outside to look at those dynamics when it comes to people who have power, whether that's state or national power, and kind of think it's just utterly ridiculous that you would have those kinds of motivations. It's really important for us to examine the kinds of emotional responses that we can have in those kinds of contexts and their incredible power over us. Like if you've ever been in a state legislature, if you've ever been at the US Capitol, if you've ever been in those environments where where power really is exercised and where you feel a sense of the divides between people, it is incredible how powerful that is on your emotions and your identity. And people who are in those kinds of positions have to find ways to exercise incredible restraint, have strong kind of other communities that can moderate them, have practices in their lives that can prevent that from happening, because it's an incredible power over us. And again, it's easy to pinpoint that when it's other people that have more power than you, but you can see those same dynamics exist at a church board meeting or in a family. Mm-hmm. And they're powerful things over humans that we're supposed to, as the church, have resources for.
One of the things that when you take a step back, whether it's Wisconsin or in Tennessee, what's disheartening is that when they want to, political leaders can act with decisive and concrete response. Like they thought that these three folks in Tennessee were a deep threat for whatever reason, and they acted immediately and decisively. 6 people murdered at an elementary school was not seen as worthy of an immediate and direct response, or any of the other mass shootings. There was another one today in Louisville. Yeah. Like that's what's so disheartening. It isn't that we can't do things. It's we choose not to, or we have prioritized certain threats, like progressive legislators are a greater threat than unregulated access to guns from people who clearly shouldn't have them. And so, and even recently, was it Charlie Kirk came out, there was something floating around the internet of a video of him basically saying, hey, yeah, these murders are terrible, but it's the price we have to pay for the Second Amendment. And he compared it to cars. Cars kill tens of thousands of people a year, but we put up with it because of the convenience of transportation. And that's what's so troubling to me is on the right currently, the threats are seen as political activists or liberals, and any extreme measure is okay against them. The threat is not children being murdered in schools month after month after month by guns. We can't do anything about that. I wrote. That's what's so frustrating.
I wrote down Charlie Kirk's quote. I have it right here.
Oh, let's hear it.
Skye, because I put it under the heading, "What we tolerate tells us a lot about ourselves."
Exactly.
Charlie Quirk over the weekend was quoted as saying, "It's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment." some gun deaths every single year. It's worth it. And then he goes on and elaborates a little bit because the Second Amendment protects all of our other rights.
Yeah.
Which is
Say that
why,
to the parents in Nashville.
Yes, which is why in countries that don't have as many guns, they don't have any rights at all, like Sweden. Right. So 2019, the UK had 162 gun deaths. Same year, the U.S. had 37,000 gun deaths. But it's worth it because we get to have more guns than the UK does.
And the UK is such an oppressive North Korea of Europe.
You can't do anything in the UK. You can't even leave the house.
I think it's even stronger, too, than what you just said, Phil, which is that the thing that you're willing to put up with, the price that you're willing to pay, tells you a lot about what you worship. I think in the days and weeks after the Nashville shooting, some of the things that were said on social media about how this is a regrettable tragedy, but we absolutely don't need to enact sweeping gun legislation in response to it, that happens every time there's a mass shooting like this, especially of children. It's so shocking if you have a purely naturalistic worldview. If you're just like, yeah, people just make rational, reasonable decisions. All that's real in the world is material. It just seems like that's impossible. If you have a worldview that says, actually, there are powerful forces at work in the world, including people's desires to worship idols that are not God, and the thing that they choose to worship can cause them to do things that you would never imagine that they would do, cause them to pay costs you can't imagine they would be willing to pay, then you understand what's happening, because it doesn't make logical sense, but it makes a lot of sense if this is the thing that you are worshiping, the thing you ultimately love. And idols have worked the same way for all of history. They will always demand more and more of you and give you less and less of what you want. So you won't get more and more freedom if you keep worshiping it, but it will keep requiring more and more children's deaths from you.
I don't know how other people feel about this, but both from the local level here where I live, the state level, national level, I feel more homeless than ever politically, because I am not on board with quite a few things in the Democratic Party. I just don't feel comfortable with it. But oh my gosh, I have to keep the vomit from coming up in my throat when I look at the Republican Party right now. It is that bad. And I don't know what to do, because I cannot imagine myself supporting the party of Lincoln the way it is right now, but I cannot in good conscience fully endorse the Democratic Party either. But if one of them is more toxic in my imagination right now, it is the Republican Party for the idolatry that you've just articulated, Caitlin. And I don't know what to do about this.
Yeah, and I think it's even more challenging because of the way the more extreme parts of the Republican Party have gotten wrapped up with more extreme parts of the Christian church in America, so that, you know, the same people that are arguing against abortion because God loves the unborn are arguing against gun control because God loves guns, or something that, and maybe it has nothing to do with God at all. It's just Americanism. You know, it's just flat out Americanism. This is our culture. I was just thinking about what we can and cannot tolerate, what we choose to accept and choose not to accept. So we cannot tolerate the idea of kids seeing a drag queen read a book at a library, but we can tolerate seeing the same kids die in a mass shooting. We can't tolerate the idea of kids being influenced by new ideas about gender, but we can tolerate the same kids being affected by poverty and food insecurity. Even when it's, you know, you've got 10 times or 100 times more kids harmed by poverty than the number of kids harmed by, you know, new gender ideas. And I'm not saying promote the gender ideas. I'm just saying, why do we not care when kids are hungry, but we care if they're rethinking their gender? What are we really afraid of?
Because hunger won't send you to hell in their minds.
Is that really it?
I don't know.
I don't think it's really about the kids most of the time.
There you go.
I mean, for plenty of people, it is. There are plenty of people on both sides of lots of political issues that deeply care about children. But the loudest voices on the most extreme ends of the political spectrum use kids like a plaything or a tool for their political gains. They're not actually scared about kids, but it's a powerful thing to say that I'm not doing this for my own interest. I'm doing it for the children. And a lot of the people that aren't on those extreme ends and the loudest voices are the people who have the most intimate connection to actual suffering kids. There are lots of moderate political voices that are actually in close relationship and connection to suffering children that are trying to advocate for them. But those are not the voices that you'll see on cable news or social media.
Right. Okay, guys, what do we do? What do we do? Any ideas? Caitlin, pick a book. Pick a book at random and give us a piece of advice.
I have a Bible over here. And
That's a book, or is it a library?
Is it a library?
It's a collection of books.
Well, that's true. It's also one book.
That's what I taught kids anyway, but maybe I was wrong. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I just do think, and I don't mean this in a kind of cliche way or as a platitude, but I do think, yesterday was Easter. And one of the things that I loved in the service in the church that I was in was we had a choir that sang Andrew Peterson's song, "Is He Worthy?" And I love that song, but I also just love that song begins with this recognition that we, even on Easter morning, even after Christ has risen, still live in a groaning, broken world. And we're still awaiting the return of Christ to make all things new and to wipe every tear from every eye. And I was at an event at a college recently with a bunch of college students asking questions about the Bible and politics. And one of the people at the end asked a question about climate change. And they were just like, it's impossible. We can't fix this problem. What are we supposed to do? And I told her, it's such a perversion of the Christian faith to say that our eschatological hope should lead us to an action. Historically, it has not. It has led us to great action. And so with that in mind, I want to say that at the end of the day, even when I don't have hope for gun legislation in Tennessee, even if I don't have hope that we'll magically fix the climate change problem, I want to work for those things as much as I can. And then I want to rest in the fact that I truly, actually do believe that Jesus Christ is coming back to dwell with his people and to wipe every tear from every eye. And when you come to the end of political maneuvering, when you know that you just cannot get the things done that need to be done to actually help suffering children, you do everything you can, you pour yourself out for them, and then you rest in the actual real hope, not just kind of a fantasy that we're all believing in together, not just a nice idea that could push us to political action, but a real, true belief that Christ is coming back and will actually make everything new.
Amen. I'm on board with that. Skye, you want to wrap us up and send us home?
Yeah, I don't know if I shouldn't try to do any better than that.
Okay.
Part of the way we express that hope is not just the activism that Caitlin's talking about, it's also prayer. Mm-hmm. And the more I look at the idolatries that are infecting our culture, including the gun idolatry, when the disciples were not as successful at exorcisms, they went to Jesus and said, "Why couldn't we do this?" And he said, "Some are only come out through prayer and fasting." And there's a point at which we reach the end of our human capacity. And prayer is a way we express our cooperation with God's work where our abilities can go no further. And I wonder sometimes if the spiritual strongholds that are present in our culture require that kind of mobilization. And I'm not saying that doesn't require political activism or voting or on any of the other things that we ought to be doing as responsible disciples and citizens. But I don't know how to keep month after month having these stories in the news and pretending like this is okay. It's just not. Yeah. And until there's enough Christians who are upset enough about this reality in prayer and fasting and activism, we're not going to see it change.
Yeah. Okay. Be of good cheer, y'all. We know how the story ends. And we also have a worldview. I was reading some of the books that from some of the guests we've had on recently about interpreting basically all of reality through the lens of the Bible and biblical Christianity is so helpful because it even helps inform why Christians in our weak moments are just as tribal as everyone else. Because we are fallen. And if you go back 100 years in some of the wars between when progressive evangelicals split off from conservative evangelicals and the progressives became more about pursuing utopia and the conservatives became more about just holding up and waiting for Jesus to come back. And we lost the ability to say, the world is fallen, but we're not called to give up. and sit down. We will never achieve utopia this side of Christ's return, but we can make things better and we can make a difference. And it doesn't mean we don't work to make a difference, even while decrying the notion that human effort alone can bring heaven on earth. So we need the redemptive message, and we need the hope that we can make a difference, even among those that reject the redemptive message, by working together. Okay, amen, and have a good week. Listen to the guest. It's going to be great, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Faithful Counseling. Life is not easy. Relationships are hard. Parenting is hard. Being the child of parents is hard. I've found a trained therapist can be a wonderful sounding board for working through the ups and downs of living in a fallen world as fallen people. Faithful Counseling is a Christian counseling service with more than 3,000 licensed therapists across all 50 states, with access by video or phone sessions or even chat and text, with expertise in depression, stress, anxiety, trauma, family conflicts, and more. It's more affordable than traditional counseling, and financial aid is available for those who qualify. We all need to talk to someone sometime, and Faithful Counseling can help. Continue growing into the best version of yourself. Visit faithfulcounseling.com/holypost and get the professional, faith-based counseling that you need. They've even got a special offer for our listeners. Right now, you can get 10% off your first month at faithfulcounseling.com/holypost. Thanks again to Faithful Counseling for sponsoring this episode. This episode of The Holy Post is sponsored by Miracle Made. Hey, having a better day tomorrow can start with getting a better night's sleep tonight, and Miracle Made bed sheets can help do that. How? Miracle Made sheets use NASA-inspired technology to help regulate temperature while you sleep. Plus, they're infused with silver to fight bacteria and keep your sheets cleaner longer. Go to trymiracle.com/holypost to try Miracle Made sheets today. And with Mother's and Father's Day right around the corner, this is the perfect way to give someone you love the gift of better and more luxurious sleep. Save over 40% and be sure to use our promo code HOLYPOST at checkout to save even more and get 3 free towels. With a 30-day money-back guarantee, if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/holypost and use the code HOLYPOST to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/holypost. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode.
So here's the thing. A lot of American Christianity tries to make faith appealing by telling people that life with God is how to avoid suffering. That message, in one form or another, fills so much of Christian media. But today's guest, Alan Noble, has written a book that is different. The highest compliment I can give it is that this book is honest. He tells the truth about life, that it's really hard, and that suffering is normal, even for people of faith. As he explains, the real issue is not whether we will suffer, but how we will suffer. And as people of the cross who are committed to Christ, we have a different outlook on both the gift and the burden of living. Alan Noble is an associate professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University and the editor-in-chief of Christ and Pop Culture. He's gotten numerous awards for his writings, and I have no doubt that his newest book will earn him even more. It's called On Getting Out of Bed, The Burden and Gift of Living. The conversation that follows is really important, and I hope that you'll share it with the people in your life that need to hear it. Here's my conversation with Alan Noble. Alan Noble, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here again.
Yes. You've been on a few times, and when I saw that you had a new book coming out, I'll be honest, I didn't know much about it, and I was like, oh, I like Alan's books. This will be great to read. And then it showed up. I got the advanced copy here,
yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute. I got ripped off because this book is a lot smaller than what I've seen you write in the past.
Yeah.
And what's this all about? It's called On Getting Out of Bed, The Burden and Gift of Living. So for those who, I don't want to go too quick, too hard, too soon here, but I want everyone in my audience to read this book. Okay. I really, really, really do. And it's only 100 pages. It is a quick read, but I sort of knew what I was getting myself into, but here's my top takeaway. This is an incredibly beautiful book.
Oh, thank you.
About a really hard topic.
Yeah.
So it seems incredibly timely. The book is about how do we how do we face pain and struggles of life, including depression, mental health disorders, anxiety? Why? This just seemed, it's deeply rooted in your own experience, but it doesn't seem in continuity with what you've written before.
Yeah.
Why did you write this? And why now?
Yeah. So I think I had been reading a lot of stories about mental suffering and mental anxiety and illness, particularly among pastors, and thinking about the problem of suicide and Christians, which is, obviously a really heavy topic, but it was something that was on my heart, and I felt like there was a need, and I had my own personal experience with mental suffering, and I wanted to write something that wasn't about me, because there's a space for that, a memoir, but I just didn't feel like I wanted it to be about me. I wanted it to be, I've been describing it as like a letter from a friend who loves you and is concerned about you. And that's what I ended up writing, hopefully. It doesn't take the form of a letter, but that's what the heart of it is.
Yeah, that tone definitely comes across. And as I finished the book, I thought to myself, like, this, you've written something evergreen. You get a lot of books. I get a lot of books, especially in what I do. And I've seen them for decades being at CT and things. And like most of the Christian books that come across my desk, I'm like, even if it's good, it's like people read it for a couple weeks, months, and then it'll be thrown into the pile, whatever.
Right.
Rarely does a book come across my desk where I'm like, people will be reading this a generation from now or even longer. And I think you've actually managed to pull that off here. Because you deal with such profound, eternal truths that are so relevant to just the human experience. It's a super text in that way, because it's dealing with these really essential questions of life and meaning. Let's begin with some of the truths that you really hammer gently but firmly in this book. And one of the first is simply the reality that life is hard.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can say that, but you're countering this lie that I think a lot of us have believed, and certainly a lot of young people have believed because of social media, that tells us life is primarily supposed to be really pleasurable. And so when you experience that it isn't, you feel like you're the anomaly.
Yeah.
How have you seen that in your own existence? Or, I mean, you work with students and stuff all the time. How do you see this play out?
It's a fascinating problem from a historical perspective, because historically, even in the church, right, we've had this awareness that life is filled with suffering, and suffering was an inescapable part of human existence, and it still is. But the difference is that today we can pretend that it's not. And we can pretend that it's not because we have all these time-saving devices, these suffering-saving devices, these medical devices, these psychological devices, all these things, these coping mechanisms, some of which are really good and I'm grateful for, but it does create this scenario where you can feel like if you're suffering, and especially if you're suffering a lot, then you must be doing something wrong, or there must be something wrong with your life because normal people don't suffer this much. And that's just not the case. The question has always been, how do you suffer well, not whether you will suffer. And this book is addressing that, because you're absolutely right. Social media is a great example of the way we are taught to think that things are getting better, that they're going to be better, that we should live these comfortable, exciting, interesting lives. I mean, even when people try to be vulnerable online, there's this suggestion that things are going to get better just down the road. Just got to go a little bit further and my life will be better and things will be better. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes you just have to sit with the suffering and learn how to glorify God and love others in the midst of it. And that's reality.
So let's go a step further on this, because I think you can lump this suffering idea into two different categories. For some people, there's an obvious external source of their suffering. So as I was reading through your book, I was thinking about some of my own experience. And when I was 6 years old, my younger brother was killed in an accident that I witnessed. And when you experience something like that as a kid, you are dramatically shocked into the reality that this world has a lot of suffering. Yeah. And then even as a child, watching my parents go through that grief reinforced to me that suffering's normal. The world is a really broken, horrible place at times. And so I'd never lived under the illusion as a kid that it was all up and to the right and everything's always great. But those were always external sources of suffering. And as I got older, as a teenager, young adult, there were moments in my life where I was suffering, but I couldn't identify any clear external reason to be suffering. It wasn't like something terrible had happened in my life again. And that's when you feel not just the pain of an internal struggle, but the guilt that I shouldn't be feeling this way because there's no clear reason for me to be feeling this way. What do you do with that second category where the suffering is happening, but there's no clear reason for it to be happening?
Yeah. So, counseling. go to and I try to make this point several times in the book. You know, it's a book about how to suffer well and how to get out of bed, but it's not a replacement for therapy. And I think I'm a huge advocate of both psychiatry and psychology because I've personally benefited, and I know a lot of people who have benefited. What's interesting, though, is that you can go and you can get great therapy and you can have the assistance of really finely targeted medication, and you can still just feel bad. There are some days you just still feel bad, and then you feel that guilt. And for me, what I've had to learn to do, because I experience that pretty regularly, where I'll just wake up and I will feel bad and I can't identify a reason. And some people have told me, well, you just got to keep digging. And I've tried digging and I'm not finding a lot of things. And for me, the challenge is to not focus on my feelings, but to move, to get up, to get out of bed, to do the next thing. And that's one of the things that I talk about in the book is the importance of just doing the next thing. Because sometimes that's all you can focus on. That's all you can manage is just doing the next thing. So I'll focus on, okay, what do I have to do next? I've got to eat breakfast. That's important to eat. Okay, so I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to eat. I don't feel like it, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to take care of my kids. I'm going to grade these papers. I'm going to write this essay. I'm going to do whatever I have to do next. And that's good. And what I try to emphasize is that this actually glorifies God. When we do this, this is actually a way of honoring God and dying to self. And it doesn't seem courageous, but I think it actually is.
Yeah, we'll get to that idea of just getting out of bed, doing the next thing in a second. But one of the other themes that comes out pretty strongly in your book is that even though your feelings are real, they may not be an accurate depiction of reality.
Yeah.
You can't always trust your feelings. And it reminded me, we've been talking quite a bit on the show recently about all the data that's been coming out from the CDC and others about the spike in mental health disorders with young people, its connection to social media. Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff wrote that book, The Coddling of the American Mind, a while ago. And they talk about 3 significant untruths that this younger generation has really bought into. One of those untruths is that my feelings are an accurate depiction of reality.
Yeah.
And so much of your book is running this interesting balance between acknowledging the reality of your feelings, not denying that,
right,
but not allowing them to dictate your behavior and, getting out of bed and the next thing you do. How do you, even in your conversations with students, how do you help them get past that reinforced idea that their feelings are reality?
That's a great question. It's difficult because our feelings feel so innately real and powerful. They have a life of their own that can overwhelm us. And so one of the things that I try to stress in the book and in my work with students is that we are responsible to God for what God has called us to do. And our feelings are not at the center of that. He's not called us to feel certain things, but called us to do certain things. And so our task is faithfulness. One of my favorite quotes, which I think I cite in the book, is from T.S. Eliot, where he says, "For us, there is only the trying; the rest is not our business." And that's something that I have to fall back on many times when my own feelings are lying to me, because they will lie to me. And so I encourage them to, again, do the next thing, but also to trust and rely on other people. I think the importance of friendships and mentors is underrated in our society. We need people that we can turn to when our emotions are lying to us, and they can tell us, actually, your life is worth a lot. Actually, life is beautiful. Actually, it's okay for you to feel joy. You don't need to feel guilt right now. That guilt is false guilt. So let go of it and delight in the world and the life God has given you. So those are some of the things that I talk about.
Yeah, it's a huge part of your book is the importance of community, whether you're talking about marriage, children, family, church, friendships, mentors, medical community help. All of that is a massive component of this book. And yeah, let me just read a quote back to you of yourself that I think is beautiful. Page 57 and 58. "Perhaps we cannot sense the precariousness of our own lives, but the lives of our loved ones feel inherently sacred. We love them, which means we feel the goodness of their existence even when we can't feel the goodness of our own. And in those moments, we must remember that the decision to scorn the goodness of our own life is always an invitation for others to scorn their lives too." You play off of this constant idea that people are watching us, and the way we treat ourselves or mistreat ourselves is modeling for them the value of their life or the lack of value in their life. And at first, when I got to some of that part of your book, I was like, oh man, you're kind of heaping the burden on to those of us who are already feeling a sense of burden.
Yeah.
But there's a good burden in this interconnectedness that we don't often we don't have an acute awareness of in our hyper-individualist society. Where do you find the healthy burden of community, and when can that cross over into an unhealthy, even codependency, where you inappropriately carry the burden of others?
Yeah. So I think, the subtitle of this book is The Burden and Gift of Living. And it is a burden to be your brother's keeper. You didn't ask to be your brother's keeper. You didn't sign up for, I didn't sign up for people to watch me as a model of what it means to live a good life. But it's going to happen anyway. And to some extent, it doesn't really matter. But there's a giftedness of this too, because it gives you purpose. And when you're in a period of mental despair, when you feel hopeless, one of the things that you lose is purpose. You feel like your life lacks purpose, it lacks meaning, it lacks significance. Right. And so when you can take a step back and realize people are watching me, they're watching the way I suffer. And when I choose to suffer well in a way that glorifies God, that's going to tell them that their lives are meaningful too. And that's a profound purpose. That's not a little thing. That's one of the most meaningful things that you can do in this life, is to suffer well so other people see that life is worth living despite suffering. And so I think that is that's a healthy way of framing it. And I guess what I would say is, you could cross over into feeling like, this could cross over into a sense of shame, where you feel like, great, this is another thing I'm failing at. But where I think it's different is the standard, what you have to do in order to be a good witness is just get out of bed, just do the next thing. The bar for you witnessing to others is so low, you can do it. And that's exciting, because when you're in a period of despair, you feel like you can't do anything. You feel like you are incapable of doing anything with any real meaning. And I want to say you can. It's going to be hard and it's going to hurt for some of us, but you can. And that's going to be a beautiful thing.
So toward that end, you kind of have different angles, different facets on this way we understand ourselves in community. One, we're a witness. People are watching us, as you said, and we need to model what it means to suffer well. Another one is there are people depending on us.
Yeah.
You're a dad, I'm a dad. There are times where we just have to put our feelings aside and get out of bed and do what needs to be done. Or if we're a spouse or our work, in our communities, in our churches, there are people depending on us, and we need to show up and do our responsible duty in caring for them. And then on the flip side, when we are in those pits of despair and can't see the way out, we need the community to come around us and help us see what we cannot see and be elevated and carried by them. All that's really good and wonderful. So here's my question. The other thing that's been coming out a lot in the data and research lately is how lonely Americans are.
Gosh.
Like, fewer people are married, fewer people are living in extended households, fewer people have any kind of voluntary community engagement, what we used to call churches. And I'm wondering, it's so obvious in your experience and in your book that this is how we are made by God to exist in community, and it's an essential component to suffering well and living well. But without people having community, I part of me was reading this book imagining, what if I was one of those people who was really lonely and isolated? What the hell am I going to do with Alan's book?
Yeah, no, I think so. Recently, my family has experienced this painful process where virtually all of our really, really close friends have moved away. It's almost like we moved because we lost our community. And just for different reasons, one summer we lost 4 of the closest families to us. And my closest friends by far moved out of state. So not a minor thing. And so this is not a hypothetical challenge that you're bringing up. This is this is it. I'm lonely. And I'll admit that. And for me, what that's caused me to do is think about being intentional in seeking out friendships. And it's not easy. The older I get, the harder it is to make and keep friends. Mm-hmm. I wrote a piece for the Gospel Coalition about this recently, just the fact that the modern world does not seem designed for creating and sustaining friendships. It seems like we're just split apart, and everyone is expected to move for work and set aside friendships for the sake of career. And it's hard to find friends. There aren't many spaces where you can find friends. And so the best thing I can say is if you find yourself in that place, I'm sorry, I feel the same way. And I think the best thing that we can do is be super intentional about finding companionship. I think we've got to be very proactive because it's hard. It's just hard to make and keep friends in this culture. And we've got to be proactive in seeking them out because it's probably not going to happen otherwise.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience too. And you're right. The older, I think we're probably not that far apart in age. I don't know for sure, but maybe I'm older. But yeah, the older I get, the harder it is to do that. And part of that is just circumstances of life. When you're a college student, I mean, there's a friend in the dorm room next to you, right?
Yeah.
So that everything's kind of served to you on a platter. And even when my children were young, they became these little ambassadors of friendship for me where, you have to, go to the park, you go to the sports, events, you go to the neighborhood thing, they're playing, their other kids are in my house all the time. And being more introverted, they forced me to engage with other people. Now that they're older and they have their own independent lives, I'm like, crap, I got to do this work on my own again. Not easy.
No.
Not easy. Okay. One of the things that I appreciate about this book is you are unabashedly writing from a Christian point of view. I mean, it just permeates everything in here and your understanding of creation and God's goodness and the goodness of life. It did make me despair a little bit for the many people I love and care about who don't have that perspective. I mean, people without faith in God are suffering these dynamics of life and mental health ailments just as much as the rest of us. It reminded me of, I used to do premarital counseling when I was a pastor, and there came a place where I just had a really difficult time convincing anyone who weren't Christians why they should get married. And here's where it came from. When I was about to get married, I had this, I joked that with my wife, the day I actually committed to her was the day the wedding invitations went out, because I knew after that there was no going back. That was it. And it was just before the wedding invitations were going out where I had this gut check, where thinking about my own parents' marriage and the challenges they had. Like I said, they lost a child, and like different cultural backgrounds and faith convictions and things like that. And one of the things I picked up from growing up in that home was, and my parents divorced when I was an adult, but they obviously loved each other when they got married, but life and circumstances changed, and it brought all kinds of challenges to them. And the thought occurred to me, I love my fiance at the time, and I want to marry her, but how do I know 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, she's going to be as lovely as she is now, or I'm going to be as lovely as I am, assuming I was? Like, you have no control over the future. Why on earth would you make a lifelong commitment to somebody when you have no control over what's going to happen? And that's when it occurred to me, is like, oh, I'm not making a lifelong commitment to her, and she's not making it just to me. We are making a lifelong commitment by the grace of God to him, that he will give us the grace to get out of bed and do the next right thing and stay committed to each other. And that's what gave me the faith to take those marriage vows. And I don't know how people who aren't Christian, or at least don't have some faith in God, make that kind of vow or commitment. Similarly, in your book, the get out of bed, do the next right thing, serve the people around you, recognize you're a witness, all that is rooted in a belief that life is good and God is present and he is redeeming all things. But if I didn't have that point of view, what do you do? So I'm asking you the impossible question.
Great.
How would you present the truth of your book to somebody who doesn't share that outlook?
What I would hope is that someone in that position would read this book and it would resonate with them, that they, if we live in God's universe and we're moving in God's universe, if we live and move and have our being in him, then when we hear stories that reflect that truth, then I think they're going to resonate with us. And so my hope would be that someone who doesn't already believe and who would read this book would read it and think, this feels right. Maybe I don't already have this belief system, but this inherently feels true. And because it feels true, I need to investigate this, because you're right. It is unabashedly a Christian text, but the truths of it are going to be true for non-Christians as well. And my hope would be that they would read it and it would resonate with them deeply, and that they would want it to be true. Just like, in those conversations with people who they have this desire to commit to life to someone, and yet they don't have a belief in the commitment towards somebody larger than their spouse. There's a way in which that commitment to their spouse is going to be an echo of a larger commitment to God, whether or not they recognize it or not. And so you would hope that by committing to a spouse, that they would see that desire for something bigger, something greater. And so here it's just made explicit in this text. And I hope that it would be an invitation to believe for people.
Well, I think in that regard, I don't know if this was intentional on your part or accidental, but I think you may have stumbled onto a critical evangelistic approach for this generation. When I was young, so much of quote unquote evangelism was felt needs based. It was, I need help with this, I need help with that. And the church comes along and says, oh, we can solve that problem for you. And by the way, we'll sprinkle a little Jesus in on the side. And I don't think that's really the right approach, or the approach we should be taking today. But when I see how many people today are struggling with exactly what you've identified in this book, and you manage to engage it, you're not offering, here's your 3-step process to overcome, all mental suffering and struggle.
No.
But what you do offer is, here's how to give meaning to this reality. And you can't really find that meaning without understanding that there is a God who is good and loving and kind.
Right.
And it is attractive. It welcomes people in to, even if they don't believe it's true, they're going to want it to be true.
Right.
And that's sort of the beginning of finding community and finding faith and finding the richness of the Christian life that doesn't deny, I mean, of all worldviews, Christianity does not deny the reality of suffering. It's the centerpiece of our faith on the cross, but it offers hope in the midst of it. And man, isn't that what we need right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned a book in here, in your book, I'm trying to find where I marked it, The Road, written by
Cormac McCarthy.
Cormac McCarthy. I've not read it.
Oh, man,
but man,
you
that
should.
sounds like, it sounds really horrible.
It's one of my favorite novels. It's fantastic.
I mean, as literature, it sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
As a story, it sounds horrible. Why did you, I mean, you didn't choose some like happy fairy tale to run as a theme through this book. Why did you choose The Road?
I chose The Road because The Road taught me things about suffering. And so those things have resonated in my own life. It's just, for those who haven't read it, it's a story about the end of the world. The world is ended, and it's a story about a father and son journeying, trying to find a place of safety. And what I love about the text is that Cormac McCarthy strips away all the parts of society that we use to distract ourselves and to numb ourselves and to give our lives structure and meaning. And he asks, and by taking all those things away, he asks, well, why live? Why put up with suffering, right? If you didn't have that career promotion, if you didn't have the possibility of a great vacation or pleasure or whatever, why would you live? What would be the purpose? What would be the reason that you would keep living? And he gives a reason. That's what's so awesome about it, is that he doesn't say, well, we're screwed. There's no point to this. No, he says there is. And part of that reason is living for others, choosing to recognize the goodness of the son's life, and the father chooses to put up with suffering and horrors and hopelessness because he recognizes that his son is a testimony of God's existence, and that makes life worth living. And I think that's true.
So, did you happen to see the film that got Best Picture this year, the Everything Everywhere All at Once?
I have not. No, I need to watch movies.
Okay. Well, you're into literature, which is a movie that is better for the mind, probably. But without spoiling too much, it's a bonkers movie. It's pretty crazy, but I understand why it got Best Picture. It's essentially arguing that there are infinite universes. It's a multiverse kind of spectacle, and everything everywhere is happening all at once, and there's really no meaning at all in this crazy multiverse.
Oh gosh.
And so one sort of the antagonist of the whole thing, again, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but her way of coping with this realization that there's no meaning to be found anywhere is self-annihilation. Like we need to cease to exist. The protagonist in the story is also wrestling with, what do I do with the reality that nothing really matters? But where she lands at the end of the film is, nothing ultimately matters, but you matter. And so it sounded a little bit like what you describe in The Road, where I find I love you, and therefore that gives me a reason to move on and continue. And in all of that, it was I appreciated that, but it falls one step short of what you're saying, which is, you matter, my son, my wife, my friend, my whatever, you matter, but it's ultimately because of God that we all matter. That's where the movie, it couldn't quite get to that point. And I thought, that's as far as a humanist worldview could possibly take us.
Yeah.
But there's one step further that makes it just transforms everything. And so I do wonder, as this generation, as we all struggle with these things perhaps more acutely than in the past, is that going to be the message the world offers? Just find hope in each other? as we all go over the cliff together? Or is there an understanding that, no, there's no cliff at the end here. We will be caught in the hands of God.
It's a kind of metaphysical pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, right? Like there's
Exactly.
nothing really holding you together except yourself holding yourself together. And so you choose to believe in the goodness of your existence because you choose to believe in the goodness of your existence. But it's that because, right? That's the word that makes the difference. My life has meaning because my son's life has meaning because God created him. Right. And that's the message that you find, I think, in The Road that maybe is not found in this motion picture. I call them motion pictures.
Well, it's worth watching, if only to have a really good discussion afterwards.
Yeah.
And your book is more than worth reading. I'm not trying to blow smoke here, Alan. I do think it's an incredibly beautiful book that is evergreen and enduring. In a way, it felt like a very honest, extended psalm. Of here's a glimpse into the mind of a man who is seeking to live with God in the reality of the world. And that's what the Psalms show to me all the time. Yours is a 100-page psalm for our day. And just a gift. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad you got out of bed and wrote this book because we needed it. And so many others need it. Guys, if you're listening to this, whether this is not, I'm in a season, I will admit, I'm in a season where I do not feel depressed. I am not struggling, I think, with any significant mental ailment or impairment right now. And yet I read this book and was incredibly grateful and profoundly impacted by it. So if you are struggling and you're looking for a voice, pick this book up. If you know someone else who is, pick the book up. If you're not struggling right now, you will, because it's an unavoidable reality of life. Pick up this book. It is so good, and it's a fast read that you'll go back to over and over again, I promise you. Alan, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thank you. It's been great.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele, and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.